Color Commentary. We are your Pauper commentators, Michael Pejek and Adrian Gonzalez. How's it going, Adrian?
I think you know the answer to that question, Mike, and it is in fact good.
Yeah, life's been good for both of us, I feel. We did push off recording for me to go out and celebrate Valentine's Day with my wife, but here we are. Wonderful Thursday evening. Nice and warm here in Boston. We hit a whole 55 degrees today, so I got that little taste of summer here. Any highlights from your week, Adrian?
It's almost Friday.
That's true. You've been working hard.
Yeah, it's been good. Something cool that happened to me this week is I went to a happy hour.
Oh, neat.
There you go. Something fun. I did that today.
Oh, well, that's cool. All right, let's take care of some upkeep stuff. I've got one. Adrian's got one. I've got another one. Last one's a little minor, but we're still bringing it up. So first off, this show is brought to you in part by Original Magic Art. Original Magic Art is a great website producing all sorts of dice bags, playmats, tokens, and even art prints of art from throughout Magic's history, as well as art from the world of fine art as a whole. They make really great products. Josh is a friend. We stand by these products. They are very good. They're constantly coming out with officially licensed Magic playmats that are just gorgeous. Right now they've got Path to Exile, which admittedly I have barely ever cast this spell, but it's some nice art. I actually really dig the art on it. So if you're heading over there and you want to pick up some really nice gear for your Magic gameplay experience, I recommend that you use our affiliate code. It lets them know that we sent you over there. We get a little bit of a kickback. You get a little bit of a discount. And that coupon code is going to be Commontary, spelled as it is in our podcast name, and all caps, and that'll give you 5% off. So again, that's Commontary, all caps, spelled as it is in the name of the podcast, 5% off. What do you got for us, Adrian?
Well, I have the Patreon. Have you ever listened to me and thought, wow, I want to give that guy money? Well, it turns out you can through Patreon. For just as little as $1 per episode, you can hear the full show, including the pre and post shows. We do have about an 11-minute pre-show today, where I waxed on some cool party ideas, and we'll see what the post show gets into. And then you get access to our patron-exclusive Discord channel. I don't mean to toot my own horn here, but I totally am. We have 28 patrons. Most of them are pretty active on that Discord. We are actually, building a community there. We'd love to see you. It's a lot of fun.
Okay.
Mike, what do you have?
Oh,
sorry, go ahead.
So I didn't realize this. I actually just double checked. Most of our patrons are on Discord. I didn't realize that. I just didn't put the dots of 1 and 2 together to get 3. But last thing on the upkeep, I will be going to GP Hartford in April. So if anyone is in the Connecticut area, and I know one of you is, because Google tells me these things, I know you're listening. Well, I was actually curious because I knew I was going to announce it. So I was like, I'm going to go check our analytics. And it's like, oh, yep, people have checked my website from Connecticut. So if you're in Connecticut or the surrounding area and you make it out to GP Hartford, there are going to be Pauper events there. I am going to play there. I'm sure there will be other Pauper community folk out there. But, come out. If you see me, say hi. Don't make it weird. That's all I got for you. If you're there and you see me, come say hi. I appreciate it. We appreciate everyone who listens to the show, and letting me know that in person is pretty cool.
I hope Mike grows out his top knot again for that.
No, that's not happening.
All right, Mike looks like a young Santa Claus in that case with no top knot.
I was gonna say, dude, our logo is literally our faces. I think. Oh no, I was gonna say I think they could pick out the fat bald guy with a beard, but I realize where I'm going to be. I will not be the only one. All right, let's get into some Pauper discussion. So, the big bombshell. They have changed the way that they are reporting league results yet again, and
no.
I just don't know why they keep messing with it, and every time it seems to get worse. So the newest revision is they are publishing results that go 5-0 that are at least 20 cards unique from other results. So previously, so when they first did the leagues, we got 10 results per day. They then halved that number down to 5, and then later said the decks all are going to be 20 cards or more different from one another. And now we're just getting this once weekly dump. Ours happens on Wednesday, which works out great for this show because we'll have access to information the day that we usually record. But we're just dumping these. There's only one copy of each exact deck list, and the next closest one is going to be at least 20 cards different. So this first week we got 34, which is one less than we would have gotten under the old model. So numbers wise, it works out. But I guess, Adrian, you're perhaps not quite as much of a numbers nerd as I am, even though you do work for a bank.
I don't work for a bank. I work for a financial technology company. Okay,
so you work with banks.
Yes, that's much more accurate. Thank you.
My whole point here is, what was your reaction to this when you saw this, change being brought up?
I don't know why they don't just do what everyone wants. So I'll set a little more light. I'm a project manager, and that's a lot about compromise and doing what people want and what they need. And sometimes the two aren't the same, but in this case they are. I don't know why they just don't do what people want.
And what people want is them just to release all the 5.0s. Like, that is by and large the sentiment that I see the most in these discussions.
And even under that model, we still had problems with it. We were like, well, why don't they also release the 4.1s? Which would be good too. But remember how much we used to complain about the fact that we only got the 5.0s? God, I miss those days.
And we weren't even getting all the 5.0s then. Like, there's never been a period where we've gotten all of the 5.0 results since League started. So
so basically where it affects us, so for the argument is that for standard it prevents people from solving the format too quickly, but fine, whatever, good, that can be a reason, I guess. I don't think it's a good reason. I think that pro teams who work together and people with a lot of time on their hands will inevitably find the best deck anyway. So I think restricting that information to other people is more harmful. But for eternal formats, it totally hoses us because we have no idea what the meta actually looks like.
And, well, more specifically, we don't know exact percentages of how well these decks are doing. And granted, we didn't have a complete picture of that before, but by getting the 5.0s and seeing over the course of a week, Stompy had 2 5.0s, Delver had 10 5.0s, and, Affinity had 8. That gives you an idea of approximately how many people are playing these decks and then taking them on to 5.0s. And I think that in losing that component pretty much across the board, it does kind of damage the view of the metagame. I can no longer go to MTG Goldfish. Obviously, they still have data from before this change was put into effect. The first dump actually happened this week on Wednesday, so yesterday. But up until all those results filter out, obviously MTG Goldfish is going to have the old data. But moving forward, it's not really going to be able to tell you, this makes up this sort of meta share. It's just going to be able to say, if they've got 8 weeks of data in there, it's going to say, well, this list 5.0'd during each of the 8 weeks, or this deck 5.0'd during 5 of the last 8 weeks. And
this hurts everyone. This hurts spikes like me who want a net deck. This hurts brewers who are trying to tune their lists on what to beat. It just really doesn't make any sense. And I think you're about to maybe explain it. It involves some really weird, I don't want to call it angle shooting because that's not really what it is in the term that we really use it for, but it's kind of like angle shooting.
Yeah, there are certain things that, let's say I'm just, trying to make my list show up. If my deck is running mostly basic lands, I might be able to get away with just swapping over to snow-covered lands and changing a handful of sideboard cards. And especially with, for example, there are, 3 different versions of... Is it Remove Soul? It's because there's Remove Soul, False Defeat, or False Summoning.
And the Essence Scatter.
There you go. Across those 3, if someone else is running, let's just say, a hypothetical mono blue deck, and there's 16 lands and 4 copies of one of those, I just swap over to snow-covered basics and swap the 4, remove souls for essence scatters. I'm at 20 cards. If both of us 5.0, both of those lists will be reported, which is weird to me. I don't know. I'm looking here at the results, and there's 2 listings for 5-color Tron, but in this case, these two 5-color Tron decks, one of them is a Generovatron deck, the other is a Marasatron style deck. So those two very clearly are different in their overall game plan once you look at them. But getting further down into some of these lists, like there are two red-black Tortured Existence lists, which kind of have the same overall game plan, but are just different enough. And one of them, yeah.
And I think my big problem with the way that this is now ranked is if you're a newcomer to the format, or if you don't really have a lot of experience with the metagame, sure, we can see the top cards in the format, which are, the usual suspects, but you might be inclined to think that the Tortured Existence deck is on par with maybe the blue-red Delver deck. It is just not, Like, it makes it look like all these decks are winning the same.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that is a double-edged sword depending on who you are. For someone on the spikier side of things, I think that this obscures valuable metagame data. For someone who likes running sort of the more offbeat lists, there are some really sort of odd and interesting inclusions here that we might not have seen otherwise. There is, I'm trying to find it here. Yeah, there's a white-black Pestilence deck, and then immediately after that, there's something that kind of is on a similar sort of mid-range plan, but adds in red for a little bit more removal, and sort of tweaks around. It's not running Pestilence, so it tweaks around what it's running in terms of a creature suite. But it's just really interesting to me. So I guess my big question here is, Adrian, you have always been traditionally the spikier half of the podcast.
Okay.
Do you think that this is sending the wrong message to players or prospective players about what Pauper's metagame is and looks like?
So here's the thing. On the one hand, I know I just said I do think that to a certain degree, and I certainly true, but it is a little bit more nuanced than that. I mentioned this to you before the show. All the major decks are represented here. I think that where we run into a problem is where we can no longer see exactly what metagame percentage each of these decks take up. We can only see that there was, two lists that slightly diverge from each other, but that doesn't really give us a picture of how popular that deck is or how quote unquote winningist that deck is. It just shows us that it is a deck that is available in the meta. Maybe this is a good thing. Maybe people will try out more stuff. I do definitely like the fact that there's more rogue elements at play here, because like you said, I think that does appeal to people. But it both shows that there are these different decks in the meta, but it obfuscates how much they actually are. So I don't know. You can't really pick what is the best deck anymore. You sort of have to say, well, these decks all look viable, then do the testing yourself, which is fine. But I think it's very important to see how much a deck is currently winning in the meta. Because if you looked at this, you might think Stompy is okay, and Stompy has not been okay for a long time.
Yeah, and I think that's the issue. Is it doesn't hurt enfranchise players as much. Like if you're looking at play for the challenges and you're trying to tune up a sideboard, it does hurt you there because you obviously just have to go off your own testing instead of saying, oh, well, I can just go on Goldfish and, get an idea of what the metagame has been looking like recently. But I do think that the players that this hurts the most are actually prospective players who don't have a lot of access to all this built up knowledge. Like you and I have been playing this format for years at this point, and we have a fairly good idea of what decks are in the format and a general idea of how well they're doing. Now we're reduced to just the challenge results, which there have been plenty of decks that have won challenges or top 8 challenges that never saw a repeat performance. And I just think that it's obfuscating data that would be useful to a sort of two players on opposite ends of the spectrum, those who are super enfranchised and those who are looking into the format. But I don't see this being the right move. And I also hope that we don't get to a point where we're seeing people who are running at worst at best functional reprints, but at worst, running actually worse cards to make sure that their result would be reported if they 5-0. I don't know. I'm unhappy with this situation, in case anyone couldn't tell. I'm definitely calmed down from after seeing these results for the first time, but I don't know. Is there anything more you have to kind of add to this, Adrian?
No, I think we've really covered it. I'm also not extremely thrilled about it, but one thing I do like is, and we're actually about to do it on this episode even, we do get to showcase more spicy brews. You know, that was one of the big reasons I think we stopped doing the deck tech, is we just sort of ran out of decks to talk about. But now that, you know, there's a plethora of decks here that we could easily discuss, you know, and tell our fans really, you know, what is out there for people to play. And then maybe it puts a little bit more onus on us to say, well, this is an established meta deck versus this is not an established meta deck. And maybe that will make, you know, like you said, maybe it's good for us that enfranchised players are going to become a more authoritative source on things than Goldfish. I don't know. Selfishly.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it does sort of put us into that role of, I was talking with someone earlier about the MTG Goldfish effect of cards, you know, spiking up in price because they were featured in content on an incredibly popular site that's popular with a wide variety of Magic players. So, I mean, obviously we're not the be all end all of, you know, this deck is good, this deck is bad, but, you know, we do have some responsibility to the listeners at home to make sure that we do say, hey, proceed with caution here. You may be messing with things you don't fully comprehend. But you alluded to this. One of the decks that we have not brought up in this discussion. Oh, there is one more thing I want to do before we get into this deck. I did want to talk briefly about the fact that one of the side effects of this deck, this change, is that it kind of highlights decks that are similar, but not perhaps quite the exact same archetype, and puts them out there. So you can kind of see, looking through here, there's 5 different or I guess 6 decks that are some version of Ghostly Flicker for value. There's a blue-black Chittering Rats, Ratslock, whatever you want to call it. There's a Prosperous Pirates Infinite Combo Flicker deck. There is a Flicker deck here that just doesn't run the Pirates at all. It runs Sage's Row Denizen, so that every time a blue creature enters, you mill your opponent a little bit.
And I will say to everyone who's listening, that is mostly a Moto thing, because it's way easier to do that than do some of the other infinite kill conditions on, you know, online.
Yeah, I'm seeing one here that looks like Dinrovatron minus Tron plus some familiars and a lot more islands. And the one that we're talking about today is one by TM.
TT, whoever you are, you can tell us how to pronounce your name if you want. Sorry.
Yeah, definitely get at us. It's, you know, it's there's something about people's online usernames. They're never really meant to be pronounced out loud. But it's interesting to see that these sort of decks that are all kind of on similar-ish game plans, like the Dinrovatron is a little bit further away because that gets to do other big mana things. But looking at these decks that all have kind of similar game plans, but are just barely different enough, these would potentially get a little bit more obfuscated under the old thing, the old reporting method, because they might get lumped in together. And now we can kind of see, like, do I think that 4 out of every 34 decks are, you know, or 3 out of every 34 decks are some straight up version of the familiar combo? No. I don't think that at all. And I think this kind of addresses what we were talking about earlier, where it may make decks seem like they are winning more than they actually are. But on to the main event. We're talking about this list from this user whose name we've already butchered at least 2 out of the 3 times we tried it. And what would you describe this deck as, Adrian?
I would say that if it is an infinite combo deck, it actually has a card with Storm in it, which I think is nuts. So yeah, let's talk about it. You want me to jump in?
Yeah, go for it. Take us through this creature base.
All right, we got 10 dudes, 10 or beings in this list, and they are 2 copies of God Pharaoh's Faithful. Card costs W. Whenever you cast a blue, black, or red spell, you gain 1 life. Spoiler alert: this is a Grixis deck, except for this card, which is white. So think of that what you will. Then we have 3 copies of Nightscape Familiar, basically the engine of the familiar deck, any familiar deck. This is, I think, the best one. One in a black, blue and red spells cost one less to cast, one in a black to regenerate. And I think that regeneration clause is why this card is pretty powerful.
Next, yeah, I've never understood the lists that run Sunscape over this. It seems real weird. Unless you have another reason to go into white, Nightscape just seems a little bit more durable because the difference between 1 and 3 toughness isn't always that huge. What with Lightning Bolt running around the format pretty constantly.
I guess the only reason that you would run, I would never run one over the other. I think you run them together, or at least the old familiar lists used to. That was a long time ago though, back when it was like an Esper sort of affair. Then we have one copy of Visit Chronarch, which is really a mnemonic wall or a Archaeomancer. 3 a blue and a red. Whenever it comes into play, you return a target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. So this is the other workhorse where you're able to actually generate infinite mana or what have you. But I do not understand the decision to run Visit Chronarch specifically. I think that at 5 mana, Mnemonic Wall is just better. And then at 4 mana, you have access to Archaeomancer. And the reason I think that at 5 Wall is better is 1, it has more toughness. 4 is relevant because it dodges Bolt. This is, and being blue-red leaves you open to both Pyro and Hydroblast. And additionally, it's only a 2/2, and it's in 2 colors. So Mike, why do you think that you would play this card over some of the other ones? I guess it attacks for more?
I have been looking at this card. I literally have it pulled up on my screen. And I'm trying to see if there's something that we've missed, because I think this is just an Archaeomancer that's a little bit trickier to cast. And looking at the mana base here, you know what? That might actually be it. I'm looking at the mana base here. There's no basic islands in here. There's no easy way to produce blue.
Well,
and be able to kind of play around with it.
Why don't you just run Mnemonic Wall?
Yeah, I'll be honest, I don't know. I can't figure out a good reason why you would take this over Mnemonic.
I can think of a reason. Maybe it's in order to diversify your deck more. Although this deck certainly didn't need that. So
yeah, I could definitely see further down the road if people really lean into the more angle shooty aspect of deck building.
This deck doesn't have any basics in it.
Oh yeah, no, we'll get to that. Don't worry.
Okay. All right. Spell time. Is it spell time?
No, we got one more creature in there.
Oh, sorry. Of course. 4 copies of Muldrifter. How else are you going to win the game? Muldrifter, you know you love it. For the new fans out there, 5 mana gets you a 2/2 that draws you 2 cards with flying, or it has the all-important evoke ability. You basically cast it, it dies, and you still get your cards. Combos with Ghostly Flicker.
Yeah, it is the glue that has held many a goofball deck together. I love this goofy flying fish. I have been casting a lot of this in games on Mitgo. I've been jamming a lot of Marasatron, which we will also talk about later in this discussion. In terms of spells, we have...
Oh, I'm glad to hear you're playing.
Yeah, I actually, not to diverge too much, but for any users at home who happen to be users of Mac computers, as I'm sure you no doubt know, it is near impossible to run Magic Online on one of them, shy of emulating the entirety of Windows. If you get on GitHub and look for the Magic Online Docker package, you'll download that. You'll download a program called Docker, and you will be able to run Mitgo natively. I have been doing this. It looks awful. I mean, not too much worse, but it doesn't look good. It's got some graphical issues, but it will run. So yeah, I've been jamming a lot of Pauper online. But let's get into the spells for this deck. We've got, first up, 1 copy Crop Rotation. This is a green for an instant. As an additional cost to pay it, you sack a land, and then you search your library for a land card and put that land into play. Shuffle your library. This is pretty good for a deck that's running some interesting land choices.
Sure. I don't know if it's worth the spell slot, and also this deck is now technically 5 colors.
Yes, it is. We've barely gotten. This is our 5th card we've actually spoken about, and we're already at 5 colors. I don't quite know the rationale behind this. I can definitely see the fact that, like, there are a couple of spell lands in here that might be nice to be able to grab at instant speed, so I think that might be a contributing factor. But interesting choice for sure. Next up, we've got 3 copies of Ghastly Demise, which is black for an instant, destroy target non-black creature if its toughness is less than or equal to the number of cards in your graveyard. This is kind of any sort of graveyard deck or control deck that runs black has usually played some number of these. 3 seems a little high to me.
So this is where this deck sort of stands alone for me. Most of the familiars combo lists don't run really a lot of interaction, and as we'll get to later, there's actually more removal in this list. Or they don't run a lot of removals, what I'm trying to say. So it is more like a control deck that then eventually wins off the backs of the Mull Drifters or the Infinite combo.
So you keep referring,
and I think we'll see that more in some of the card choices.
You keep referring to this as an infinite combo. I don't actually see how this deck goes infinite. Let's get through the spells, but I don't think it does.
Is it Chronarch and Mulldrifter?
But you're still paying mana for that.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
I don't think it goes infinite.
Yeah, might be. No.
Good.
No, because you have Nightscape Familiar and Bounce lands. You will always net mana.
We'll get into this, but okay. So we've got 3 copies of Ghastly Demise.
Okay.
Then we've got 2 copies of Carevex Torch, which is X and red for a sorcery. Instants that target Carevex Torch each cost an additional 2 generic to play, and it deals X damage to target creature player. So this is a tougher to counter fireball, basically.
And it's typically the payload in an infinite mana deck.
Sure is. It could also be used in a deck that just produces a lot of mana, and
we're gonna talk about this right now. If you have Izzet Chronarch and you have Nightscape Familiar, if you flicker Izzet Chronarch and anything else by tapping your bounce lands, you will gain mana.
What's untapping them?
Oh, I'm an idiot. Yeah, you're right.
No. We're all good here. Yeah, no.
Mike's right. Mike's right.
I was trying to figure it out because you were so sure about it, and I just don't think it goes infinite. I think it's got ways to cheat mana, but
we'll
get to some of those.
It is snap.
Yeah,
of course, it's snap.
There's 4 copies of snap. I think the only one of these effects that's left in the format. It's 2 and a blue. Return target creature to its owner's hand, untap up to 2 lands. Good tempo play.
Bad.
Yeah, we're all human, right?
Mike, did you just call that a tempo play?
I sure did.
Continue.
Next up, we've got 3 copies of Chainer's Edict. Removal all-star. If you're expecting your game to go long, it works very nicely because you will get to cast this a second time, and that is functionally a 2-for-1. After that, we've got Desperate Ravings, 1 in a red, instant, draw 2 cards, then discard a card at random, and it flashes back for 2 in a blue. What are your thoughts on this one?
Well, Mike, I think it's pretty desperate. I don't know. Feeds the Ghastly Demise. Don't like that it's random. Is this really the best we could do?
Well, so I do like the fact that it's instant. That's nice.
Yeah, that is pretty key. And then if you have Nightscape Familiar, it does cost less, which is nice.
Yeah.
So maybe there's some value there as well. Maybe you don't care about pitching the random card. I don't really know. I think 4, obviously, the deck's creator thinks it's an important card because there's 4 copies of it. So I imagine it is good in some situations, but the random is really what's killing it for me. That being said, Instant's a big deal. I think usually in this place, someone might play Deep Analysis, which I see this deck is also playing. So maybe they just wanted more copies to dig deeper.
I would also say that this could possibly be compulsive research in this slot. It lets you control what the discard is. It is 1 more mana, but it does also dig you a card deeper. And even if you pitch the 2 cards to it, you're still just you're up a card just like you would have been with Desperate Ravings, but you're not potentially goozling yourself on the draw. I don't know. I do think the flashback part does make it a little bit better than compulsive, but I'm kind of in the same boat with you of I'm really not a fan of the fact that discard's random. Next up, we've got Ghostly Flicker, a single copy of it. This is this seems a little slim to me.
Ambitious.
Yeah. I mean, it obviously worked.
Decks that run singleton copies of, well, it's not infinite decks. Maybe it doesn't matter as much, but I'm very wary of decks that run singleton copies because they get so hosed if you have like any sort of interaction that puts it in the bin and then you exile it, you know? So I don't know.
I've got to imagine that this is a deck that tries to set up for as long as possible and only starts flickering once it's sure that it can get it back and not lose it. That's true. It's still, you know, and obviously there's a decent chunk of draw spells in this deck, so you're likely going to be able to get it in the deck in the games that you are more likely to win. So I'm not hating it. I wouldn't mind seeing a second one, but that's just me. Next, we've got the ever spicy Last Rites. 2 and a black sorcery. Discard any number of cards from your hand. Target player reveals their hand. You choose a non-land card from it for each card discarded this way. That player discards those cards. So this is basically you pitch X cards and you're going to get X cards out of their hand, assuming they don't have that many lands in it. What do you think about this?
Yeah. I've had this cast against me when I've had like 4 lands in my hand. It doesn't feel that bad. I mean, I guess if you have a lot of non-lands, it does. But ditching your whole hand on the off chance that your opponent also has some good cards to ditch doesn't feel good to me in this kind of list, which is all about card, which I think should be all about card advantage. I guess it does power on maybe your chainers. You know, you don't really lose your chainers. You don't really lose your desperate ravings. It powers up your ghastly demises, but I don't know. I don't think I like it a whole big lot.
It kind of shocks me that it's main deck, because that to me indicates that it's fairly important to game plan that you be able to see this, but I don't know. I can definitely see like sometimes this is going to be pretty close to a mind twist, but other times I can just see it like how bad does it feel to brick off this thing?
The problem with comparing it to Mind Twist is that Mind Twist doesn't you require to discard cards equal to the number of cards you're hoping that your opponent also discards.
Yeah, it kind of puts you. It's a little bit of a gambit saying like I'm willing to bet I can top deck better than you, and I think this will work. I do like the fact that you don't discard as an additional cost. It's actually part of the resolution. So if this gets countered, you're not down a bunch of cards, but it's still kind of a funky effect to go with in this slot. Next up, you mentioned that there's a storm card in here. It's Scattershot. Scattershot is an instant for 2 and a red, and it deals 1 damage to target creature and then has storm. So this is most of the time, I imagine when you're casting it, going to be pretty close to a board clear.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think of how you would chain this together. I guess you have out Nightscape Familiar or 2. Maybe you desperate raving. It involves some amount of snaps. It has to, right? Maybe you ghostly flicker a couple of times, and then you fire off one of these bad boys and clear your opponent's board.
Yeah, I think that's got to be pretty much it.
It's a pretty interesting conclusion.
Yeah, and this is notably one of the few storm cards still legal in our format. I think you mentioned it earlier. There's 3 copies of Deep Analysis, 3 in a blue, excuse me. Sorcery, target player draws 2 cards, and then flashback 1 in a blue, pay 3 life. So this is pretty good, and it does, again, it's something that you can pitch to Last Rites if you so choose, and not lose total value on it. In fact, it makes the spell cheaper to cast. So I think this is a fine inclusion.
Also, brief sidetrack. There is a Merciful Fate song called Last Rites, and now I cannot get it out of my head.
Good old Merciful Fate.
Rounding out Merciful Fate.
I know you do. Rounding out our spell suite, we've got 1 copy Swirling Sandstorm, which is 3 in a red, for a spell that does nothing unless you have Threshold. And then it's a sorcery, and it says it deals 5 damage to each creature without flying. So this is.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say it's pretty close to a Wrath against a lot of decks.
Yeah, and going back to what you mentioned earlier, this is also traditionally a sideboard card. So it is interesting that we have a couple of instances here of perhaps metagaming where you have cards that are traditionally found on the sideboard in the main deck.
Yeah, and I'm liking Swirling Sandstorm less since the last results we saw were kind of pointing towards Delver sort of regaining its seat or getting closer to regaining its seat at the top of the format. I'm liking this less main deck than I usually would, but I think this is fairly metagame dependent. Like if you knew you were going to face nothing but Stompy for 5 rounds, I would jam this any day of the week in the main deck. It feels good. So yeah, it could have been a metagame call. And then finally, as a related note, our artifacts: 2 copies of Prophetic Prism, 2 generic for an artifact, tap it, pay 1, add a mana of any color to your mana pool, so it filters your mana. And when it enters the battlefield, you draw a card. And Adrian, do you want to take away this motley collection of lands?
Yeah. First up, got 1 copy of Bojuka Bog. Enters the battlefield tapped. When enters the battlefield, you exile all cards from that target player's graveyard, and then eventually you can tap it for black. This is a pretty good crop rotation target. I imagine looking over the list, it's one of 2 that I could imagine getting on the regular. Basically, you can crop rotate for it in order to hose your opponent, doing some graveyard shenanigans. It's a pretty strong card. Typically, we see it in some decks that play black. It's just a good utility land. It's one of the strongest utility lands, in my opinion.
I also like this as a ghostly flicker target for what it's worth. If you flicker this in a Chronarch, you get your flicker back for free, and you can at any point disrupt whatever graveyard shenanigans your opponent's up to. So I like that.
Comboing with Ghostly Flicker as well is actually Crumbling Vestige. Enters the battlefield tapped. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. You tap it for colorless. So interesting inclusion here. Definitely abusable with the Ghostly Flicker, but not my favorite card if you don't have Ghostly Flicker. In a 5-color deck, even though you do get that initial burst of mana, having this tap for colorless feels pretty awkward. Although I guess it does combo with the bounce lands, which we'll get to in a second as well, as do most of these lands actually.
I am also going to point out here that and this is a bit of setup, 2 Nightscape Familiars, Izzet Chronarch, and Crumbling Vestige does technically let you get infinite storm count, because the 2 Nightscapes will drop the cost of the flicker to 1. And then if you flicker Chronarch and Vestige, you will just go infinite in terms of ETB triggers and Storm. So there's that little cute interaction. I think it's the only one in the deck you can do that with, for what it's worth.
Going infinite, though. I see. Interesting. There's also 4 copies of Deemer Aqueduct, the Deemer bounce land. It does go really well with Bojuka Bog and Crumbling Vestige. You bounce them back to your hand. They are technically a form of card advantage. 3 copies is it Boilerwork, same deal, except this time for blue-red. And then again, another spicy ETB target. So actually, the more I look at this mana base, the more I like it. Mortuary Mire is the other great utility land. Enters battlefield tapped, it taps for black. When enters the battlefield, you put target creature card for your graveyard on top of your library. So it makes sense you can never really mill yourself. Well, it's much harder to. And then we have 3 copies Radiant Fountain. Again, another great bouncer flicker target. It taps for colorless, but you gain 2 life when it enters the battlefield. And then rounding it out, we have some filter lands, I guess for all that colorless mana. 2 copies of Shimmering Grotto. You tap it for colorless, or you tap 1 and it to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. And then 4 copies of Unknown Shores, which is the same thing. So 6 copies of that card.
So this is quite the ambitious mana base. I do like the fact that all these things sort of interlock well. We've got like all these ETB effects that play nicely with crop rotation. They also make decent flicker targets at absolute worst. The filter lands I feel are kind of necessary just to make sure, like as we mentioned, the first 5 cards by the first 5 different cards of this deck, we already got to 5 colors. So I think having access to that is really important for this type of deck. So I think that's pretty solid. And I do want to bring something up here that I mentioned briefly when we were talking about this in the pre-show. Would this just be better as a Tron deck?
I'm inclined to think so, but I think that TM does not want to play a Tron deck, and so instead they have this spicy brew instead. And I think that is respectable on some level, because as I've looked at the mana base more, it just interacts so well with the rest of the deck and with itself that I think putting Tron in here would kind of ruin that. It would require you to do a bunch of other stuff too, like maybe play map or something. Maybe not map, but I don't know. I feel like Tron would require a little bit more setup and leave you a little bit more vulnerable.
So maybe it's just in part that I've been like jamming a lot of Marasatron online, but I'm looking here, like a lot of the sorceries and instants there, it's strongly biased towards instants. And I kind of think that going for the teachings aspect of Tron and being able to sort of, because I have actually, spoiler alert, been running 0 expedition maps in my Tron deck. I've just been running crop rotation and teachings, and that actually works pretty well.
We actually missed a very important card, not only for this deck, but also for Tron. There are 2 copies of Prophetic Prism in this deck.
Oh no, I mentioned Prophetic Prism.
Oh, my bad. Sorry.
No, we're all good.
It's very important.
I just can't help but look at this after having jammed so much of this deck, and like there's certain things that suffer. Like, you know, you're less likely to hit that early turn God Pharaoh's Faithful. You know, some of these mana costs, like Is It Chronarch's a little bit on the tricky side, but when looking at something like Tron, you're not generally playing anything that's much harder to cast than those. Like you're playing Rolling Thunder, you're playing, you know, like the flashback on Edict. Sometimes you're running Even Car's Justice. You're not generally trying to hit tougher mana costs. I guess the only thing this doesn't, like, I think the big thing for me as well is it just makes Caravec's Torch much easier to become lethal. So I can totally respect if someone doesn't want to do that, but I'm just looking at this and seeing, like, this looks a lot like something that you could fit Tron into and all of a sudden, like, have this combo kick off so much quicker. So I don't know. That's just me. Let's run through this sideboard real quick. So we got a copy Dispel, blue instant, counter target instant. 2 copies Elect Trickery, red to ping something that you don't control, or 1 in red to ping everything you don't control for 1 damage. 1 copy Gorilla Shaman, 1/1 for 1, XX1, destroy target non-creature artifact with casting cost of X. 3 copies Hydroblast, 3 copies Pyroblast. 2 copies Nihil Spellbomb, a copy of Ancient Grudge, the second use for green mana that we've seen so far, another copy of Last Rites, and another copy of Deep Analysis. Looking at this, I'm seeing, you know, stuff that's pretty standard. You got Electrickeries to deal with your Delver matchup. You've got Gorilla Shamans to nerf Affinity. You've got Nihil Spellbomb for graveyard decks, and Hydra and Pyroblast for blue and red decks. Is there anything else you could think of sort of jamming in here in the sideboard at all?
Lightning Bolt.
That is an interesting one to not have in here. I guess the 1-drops aren't great here, right? Because you just have so few ways to kind of hit those.
There's also a 5-color deck. You could conceivably play something like, I don't know, Standard Bearer. Probably not the best in this deck. Probably don't care. But maybe Ray Revelation might be useful. Could think maybe you could play... I don't know. There's a lot of options when you're planning on playing 5 colors, but these are all at the very least base Grixis, so maybe it's probably fine. But this deck's really only splashing for, you know, the second half of Ancient Grudge, Crop Rotation, and the 2 copies of Godfarer's Faithful. So that's probably really the maximum it can get away with.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't want to go greedy into like one of those goofy mana bases, goofy sideboards like how I've seen your Affinity sideboard. It is ambitious.
Well, Infinity's an ambitious deck. It's not a coward deck.
It is not. That is not a deck for cowards. I will put that. I will go on record as saying it is a brave choice to play Affinity, especially with Gorilla Shaman running around. But so I guess what are your thoughts on this deck? Because it's a little bit of a conundrum. I think this player is the only person I've ever seen play this exact style of like almost familiars but not quite and have really significant results with it. So I guess what are your thoughts on it?
I agree with you. I don't know if it's particularly that good. Alex Ullman, my favorite deck's not very good. But good on TM. Like you said, if anyone could pilot this deck to a 5-0 finish, it's definitely them. They're a good player. So if you're a good player, I think you can get away with a little more.
Yeah, and I don't want to go out there on record being like, yeah, no, play whatever. But I do think, like, the fact that I look at this and I see like this would be great with Tron pieces added in means that it's not that far away from established lists. So I think it's doing something similar that we're seeing in kind of some of these other Flicker decks and some Tron decks, and it's just going about it in a slightly different way. And obviously it was still effective, like it 5-0'd, but I don't anticipate this to be like, the scourge of the metagame. I have a feeling that this is something that we'll see repeated 5-0s, but I doubt that this is the kind of deck that, you could just hand to someone and be like, sure, here, go. Pauper's easy. Take this. Like, this would be a nightmare for a new pilot. But, and I mean, I guess we pretty much covered what we wanted to say about alternate cards in here. And again, like, obviously people will let me know in the comments. If we missed an infinite combo, please tell me, because I've just been staring at this thing and like, if there were 2 Chronarchs, I'm pretty sure that could go infinite with Snap somehow. But again, I just don't know. It's too complicated for me, Adrian. All right.
You're just not smart enough.
So I guess if you want to try this out, it's fairly affordable. It's $60 online, and looking here, like crop rotation and your Hydro and Pyroblast, and then like I guess kind of Ghastly Demise make up most of the cost. Most of this is like penny cards, so the only expensive parts is oh god, I missed Gorilla Shaman. It's only $6 now. Okay, sure. But it's definitely not a super expensive deck outside of stuff that you will probably need to own at some point, regardless of what deck you're playing. And then in paper, it's $40. Looking here, the
take it to F&M.
Those Chainer's Edicts, man, they just keep going up. Although this is claiming that it went down a little bit in price, but who knows? So yeah, I don't think that any of the expensive parts of this are, really things you'd regret buying. But if this sort of weird offbeat deck appeals to you, definitely check this list out. It looks really interesting. It's playing a lot of really good cards just in terms of raw card power, but might not click at the first try. Honestly, like, I love convoluted control decks, and even I'm looking at this and going like, okay, I guess I could probably pilot this, but I don't know. Not here to yuck anyone's yum. If this is your jam, go for it. Any other closing words on the list, Adrian?
You should hear all the yums that Mike yucks when you guys aren't listening.
Constantly.
It's a lot.
I am the police of the internet. But again, this is a deck that we might not have seen if it were not for this new reporting system. So
make of that what you will.
Yeah, I think that the new reporting system, personally for me, is a step backwards. But I think overall, it's more double-edged sword, where it does make sure that decks like this are not missed by the old standard. But it's also cutting off actual numbers about metagame percentages in terms of the winner's circle. So I think, we'll see where this goes. Like, obviously we've had what at this point 3 different types of reporting since we've done this show, and none of them have killed Pauper yet. So I don't anticipate this to be, a disaster. I definitely for those in the Discord I was less favorable about this after we saw the first batch of lists, but I've cooled down on it. I think, we'll let it play its course, and if it turns out to be bad, Wizards can always change it. That's just the thing that can happen.
It's set in stone now.
Oh, And before we go to the taking you out of the show segment, I did want to bring up, Adrian, did you see all the new products that got announced?
There are a lot. Why don't you run us through them?
Well, I only really wanted to talk about one, actually. I think a lot of them are not dreadfully relevant for our format, but the one that I did think was relevant was Battle Bond. And I don't know if the one that is described as being similar to Conspiracy in spirit. It focuses on two-headed giant, and for those who have ever played with Oath of the Gatewatch, there's the keyword surge, which is a cost reduction if you or a teammate have played a spell this turn. So I have to imagine that Conspiracy has been good to us as a format, right? Like we've got the Monarch cards. Those are very powerful. So I would keep an eye on Battle Bond as soon as we start getting spoilers for it, because, you know, we just did an episode where we talked all about how supplemental sets influence this format more than standard sets, but I would definitely keep an eye on this, especially if they're describing it as something similar to Conspiracy. I think that'll work out well. You excited for that at all, Adrian?
Yeah, I love new product. We just had a whole episode about it.
Yeah, and of course, hopefully we don't all get product fatigue over the summer, but that may be the reality we're facing come July or so, but we'll see. So definitely keep an eye on that. We obviously have, when is Masters 25 even coming out? Like that,
I feel like it's really soon.
I feel like it's going to be one of those things where I blink and then all of a sudden it's here. Release date March 19th or March 16th. So I guess we'll be getting spoilers for that fairly soon, but stay tuned. We will talk about it. You will hear us talk about all the different things that get spoiled for it, but I think unless you've got any other things that you'd like to discuss this week, Adrian, I think it's I think we've stayed our welcome, and you can take us out of the show.
Well, everyone, and those of you who haven't turned off the show yet, thanks for joining us today. This podcast is brought to you by the support of our patrons. Consider supporting us if you like the show. You can check those video, the description of this podcast for details on where to find us. We'd like to remind you, for listening to this on a platform with reviews, they're always appreciated as they boost our visibility. If you've got a deck list or idea for a topic, feel free to contact us either via our website or by emailing us directly at colorcommentary@gmail.com. Special thanks to our LGSs, Pat's Games in Austin and JP Comics over in Boston. And of course, the ever musical L. You can find our theme song, Quantitative, and other great tracks over at soundcloud.net/ELLELLELL. Till next week, this is Adrian and Mike, and we are signing off for Color Commentary.